Right, hello everyone. Sorry about that little delay. Trying to get all the social media stuff sorted out. Apparently, they don't make it easy to embed videos, Twitch, into your social media, so I have to struggle with that to try and get it sorted out. But apparently, what you can do, there is a way to do it. And it's essentially a URL for Twitch that includes your channel name. I have to do a how-to on that at some point. But anyway, so this is just a continuation of what we were doing yesterday with the IMVU Valentines thingamajig, or the Harter bike. Which we modeled up, meshed up yesterday, added some materials, which are the colors, and then we did some basic UV maps and are using some generated temporary textures. We're going to change that today, and we're actually going to add some bitmaps, and we're going to use everything that we've created. Let's just move this out of the way so it's not confusing. So this is our Harter bike. What we're going to do is, where's the I got the right version open. There should be some vertex painting on that, but it's not there. Oh, number 5. There we go, vertex painting. So move that out of the way. So what we're going to do is create a set of very basic textures, because obviously texturing something is an art of its own and can take quite a bit of time. So we're going to create some basic textures using the UV maps that we generated. Just move that so that it's easy to see. So we're going to straighten all of this up a little bit to make it easier to create some basic textures, and we'll do this. We'll make one or two other corrections, or not corrections. Well, might as well just get straight into it actually then. Yesterday, one of the things that we did, and this is one of the advantages of using Blender, I don't know if any other application does this, but yesterday when we were just mapping out the heart, or the main body of the bike, the texture was originally created so that it was 256 wide and 512 high. So that's this bit, these two. We can change that so that the texture is 512 wide and 256 high. So we just need to double click in there. So we're in the UV editing layout. So 512, 256, and that'll change the shape of the texture that we're going to use, and then we can just press the E key, E for Edward or E for Echo. It'll regenerate the map, and depending on the shape you'll want to switch between angle based or conformal. Conformal is more appropriate for regular or angular shapes, whereas angle base tends to be more appropriate for organic shapes or shapes with a lot of curves. But what this is doing is allowing us to essentially map the two halves of the body of the bike in a way that's easier for the texturer. We need to double check that we haven't. Oh, we have. So just shift that up. In fact, one little thing that's useful here is to enable snap to pixels. And so to make sure that all of that's, just do a quick scale, and this forces all the vertices to snap to the nearest pixel, and that makes it easier for artists to work with. So there's that little correction, and we don't need to straighten up the, we just do need to make sure that everything is inside the texture space. Yeah, that's fine, that's fine. That's okay. Now we need to correct the exhaust. And snap to pixels is still on. That's a global setting, so once that's active it applies to everything. But same again, select everything, just press the S key to scale and just force everything to snap. And then we have to go through the slightly tedious aspect of snapping everything to so that it's straight. Don't necessarily need to do this if this is your own project that only you are going to be working on. But if other people are going to be deriving from this, depending on the severity of the curvature that's as with this upper section, depending on how severe the curvature is of certain sections, you might have to just leave your UVs set up the way that they are unwrapped instead of making adjustments to the UV map. But there isn't really a quick way of doing this. But what this is essentially doing is squaring everything up so that the left and the right match up, so that if someone is to do some text or paint a straight line across this entire texture width, where the edges are, they should align, they should line up. So where are the seams? There's the seam. So these two faces line up along that edge or that seam, and that makes it easier for texturer or the person that's deriving. Same for those two faces. So we need to do this section now. Oh, we need to collapse that. So, switch back to because of the shape, there's a group of vertices in this corner. We need to collapse them all together. Quick way, just select everything, remove doubles, and because we are in because we're making something for IMVU, just up the tolerance, and that should take care of that, which it does. So they're all joined together, which now means, yeah, so that vertex is now just a single vertex. So what we're doing is adjusting these two vertices and these two so that they line up across the seam. Like that. So that again means that if someone's drawing a line across there, it'll line up. You don't necessarily have to worry about the curvature, but if you wanted to, you can fix that and straighten them up. But that's going to depend on the shape and how obvious any texture distortion is. Which also then shows whether this top edge is straight. Which it is more or less, so that's good. Then we've got the end, well that's fine. There is something we can do with this actually. I wonder if so now that we've got the UV map sorted out, what we can do is go back into edit mode. Whoops, and give this a little bit more shape. So we can either extrude and then scale. Whoops. We need to scale relative to the selection instead of the cursor, which is up here. So we want to scale relative to the shape that we've got here instead. So where we can either extrude and scale, whoops, or we can inset. So if we select the face, press the I key, I for eyeball, and then, whoops, we can inset, and then we can extrude inwards, scale that so that we create something that's got a bit more shape. Might actually collapse that, so we can collapse things like this. Select the shape, select the face, press the S key, hold Control, and just move it all together until it collapses. Select everything, remove doubles. So what this does, or what this has done, is we've created a rim around the edge, which we can separate from the inside. So we need to remap that. So press the E key, that'll create another. Scale that down, move it to one side so that we can see what we're doing, and just plonk that inside there to use up that space. But what this does is it creates a nice clean edge around the exhaust, because if we left that as it was, so let's just select one of these. So we left that as it was. If you were to draw an edge around there in your texture, you're going to get blurring occurring because your edge is defined by the texture rather than the mesh structure. And because it's only a couple of polygons that you're adding to the mesh, it's often better just, or simpler, just to add a bit more structure. Where's our motorbike gone? Heart a bike. There it is. So double check the whoops, not them. Yep, that's fine. Then the handlebars. So this needs to be straightened up a little bit. Do a forced snap, so select everything, scale up and then back down. So that's the top. Okay, so that's fine. And what we'll eventually do, one of the advantages of doing this to your UV maps is that come time to save them as texture maps that other people will use, it means that they're much easier to work with because everything's lined up. But again, this isn't necessarily something that you would do with your own, if it was something only you were working on, because obviously this takes a bit more effort to sort out. That's the handlebar. So what we can do with the exhaust, vertex paint, make that darker. Excellent. So, save the file. Now I need to create our texture maps. So back into UV edit mode. So make sure right, so UVs, export UV layout. This is the body. Uh, 256 PNG. Now is it 0 or 1? Can't remember, so 0. Right, so that's saved that. So if we open image editor, so this is Corel Photo Paint, but GIMP works the same, Photoshop, all the same. What we're looking for is the texture map that is, or the UV layout, which is a PNG file. Which is somewhere. Where's the file gone? Why did that save that? Export UVs. Furniture Harter bike. Oh, there it is. Right, okay, found it. Alright, so it's 1. So when you're creating your texture maps, you can either create a wireframe like this in Blender, which means that your export settings, your opacity 0 for wireframe, or 1 to make it completely solid, and it will use the material texture, the material properties, so it'll color it. So what we can do with this to check our UVs, save this, save as, flatten that. So what we can do now is start to replace the temporary textures, which are these checkerboards, and we can replace them with images. So for that, we select the object, make sure the material is selected, texture properties, make sure that type is set to image or movie, and then down here, source, in the image subsection, it'll show generated at the moment, which is this texture map, which is this checkerboard. Change that to single image, and it'll open up a little dialog box. Click the folder icon, and we want to find the Harter bike texture. Which is there. Select, open, 1, 2. Excellent. So they are the right way around as well. Excellent. So that's one of the reasons why you would, what you can do with your maps, when you're working with your UVs, this is one of the things about getting them sorted out so that they look how you expect them to, but save the texture out, or your texture map, create a temporary bitmap, but put some text on it. Doesn't have to be numbers. Put some readable text on it so that you can check the UV map is the right way around, because it's the wrong one, X. So I've just flipped that, mirrored it. So had the UVs been the wrong way around, we'd see that with the text. So we can then correct that. And that's useful for these types of objects where you've got a left and a right. So let's create texture maps for the other objects. UVs, export, one, yep, that's okay. Let's take a look at that. So that's a slightly grey colour because we didn't change the diffuse. So if you want to, so this is the interesting thing or useful thing about the way that materials work in Blender. So at the moment that's pretty much white, but you can change the color. And what that'll do is change the color of the UV map that's so that was the original. And that's the modified one. So again with this, if you were going to add, let's say for the sake of argument, a little shield or some icon or picture or something, again, add a bit of text. It's a bit big. Actually, what you could do save, flatten, and load that into the material. So we do the same thing again. So material properties, texture properties, double check everything is image or movie, source, single image. It'll add an input field, click the folder icon, and where is it? There it is. So that's flipped because the two handlebars are mirrored, they're mirrored objects. It's inverted the original. So depending on how you wanted your mesh to be textured, you could either create a unique instance, which would mean another material, so you would have two handlebar materials instead of just the one, but that looks fine. Do the same thing to the exhaust. Export. Blah de blah de blah. 1. Yep. So that's our exhaust UV. So flatten. default. Right, so again, texture properties, exhaust, generated, single image. Sure, there's a way just to load images. Not behaving itself. Oh well. Oops, there it is. Voila. So again, we can see that the exhaust being mirrored objects, the numbers are inverted. Right, so save the file. So there is something that I just noticed that we didn't mention yesterday. We've used vertex coloring or vertex painting on this mesh just to add some interest. And there are there are two things that you can make use of. So because vertex colors are assigned to individual vertices, so the color information, the RGB values, are stored at the vertex. So that means that when you, as we've done here, when you add shading to that vertex to create the impression of shadow, what you can do is take advantage of the location of that vertex. So annotations, we need to change color for this because we're on a red. So this vertex that's right here, we can take advantage of that position and the way that vertex painting essentially bleeds out along edges rather than face. It looks like it's going across the face, but it's not. It's the vertex and the edge that determines how vertex coloring appears on the mesh. But as you might see from this, let me clear that. Whoops. We've got two, not issues, but we've got two things that we need to contend with. We can make use of the fact that that vertex is where it is. And drop the handlebars over that vertex so that it makes the shading look appropriate. It's relative to the presence of the handlebars. So because that shading is on that particular vertex, it's now hidden from view, it makes the shading look a bit more realistic. So that's point one, or tip one. The second one is the fact that, right, so we're in the right mode. Annotation. Depending on the structure of the mesh, although the vertex and the edge determine how the color spreads across the mesh, its orientation relative to the actual face can be affected by this diagonal edge from corner to corner. So on this side, it's what's that, top left to bottom right, but on this side it's actually again top left, bottom right, but because we're actually on the other side of the mesh, the vertex color spreads more evenly along that hidden edge, whereas on this side this edge blocks the spread of the color. It can't get past that edge, and the result excuse me, the result changes the spread of the vertex color. So to correct that, what you would have to do, select the edge, select the face in edit mode, triangulate, and it's automatically corrected it for us, and it would mean rotating this edge. So Control F, rotate edge, and you can see that it changes the distribution of the color because the edge no longer blocks. So you need to do that to this one as well. Triangulate, and that's automatically fixed it for us. And same with that one, and that's automatically fixed it. And it's the same on the back as well, so you have to watch out around the entire object. So fix that one, that's automatically fixed it. Double check those. So flip those. And then we can join them back together. So that's selecting the triangles. So Shift right click and then using Control J, not Control J, Alt J. There we go. Okay, perfect. So that is a very basic texture creation process for Cupid's bike. So save that, save. So what we've done is we've used the UV maps of the objects themselves to create a set of texture maps from the wireframes that we've exported. So that's how easy it can be just to create a set of texture maps for your derivables. So once you've got your, we won't do this now because obviously texture, as I said at the beginning, textures are an art of their own. It can take quite a while to sort out. So next step is, once you've got all your textures, once the mesh is all set up and working the way that you expect it to, we can now turn it into a furniture item. So this project was started from, where is it? Far too many files. There we go. So this project was started from the furniture starter file, and you can get that from in fact, actually, let me just this. Right, so, pause. I have to be careful because the stream is playing on the website. So if you go to catsbits.com/IMVU, you'll get all the Blender example files. So if you scroll down to this section at the bottom that's coloured, you'll be able to download all the various files that you need for creating your different products for IMVU. So the one that we're using at the moment is the standard furniture starter file. So that's catsbits.com/IMVU. And that's what you'll get. And the motorbike, or the Harterbike, was started from that. So we have all the furniture nodes, or all the bits that we need to create a furniture item. For this, all we really need is the root node of the furniture. Where's our motorbike? There it is. So this is a bit tiny at the moment. That's super tiny. So what we can do is use the avatar dummies as a scaling reference to then scale up the objects. So for this, let me think. Alright, so we've got a copy of the file, so that's fine. Right, so we need to join things together, make a single object. Now before we do that, let me just double check, see if that works. Yes, it does. Okay. So one of the things that we need to join everything together, but because this side of the bike handlebars and this exhaust are mirrored duplicates of these two, when they are joined together, they will flip inside out, they will invert. So you can either fix that and you'll get an error message. The normal way to fix that would be Control A and then rotation and scale. So what we're doing is using the apply. But for duplicated objects, they are instances of an original. So you can't do anything to these mirrored duplicates unless they are unique instances or unique objects in their own right. And the way that we can do that is select the object, press the U key, and we'll get this make single user pop-up appear. all. Is it object properties? No, it's object data properties. So that's this one. Object data properties. And we've got this section at the top. And at the moment, it's showing that the object that we've got selected has a number 2 associated with it. And that's the number of users that are using this object. So this object on this side is number 1, and this one is number 2. So we can make number 2 unique by selecting it, right click, and then clicking on the number 2. And it'll append a unique reference which makes this a unique object now. So now we can do Control A and apply scale, and it inverts the mesh. So edit mode, select all, invert. We need to do the same thing to the exhaust. So in data properties again, still selecting that exhaust, which is the duplicate, we see that that has 2 users. So this is user 1, this is user 1, and this is user 2. So to make user 2 unique, select, click the 2, and it adds an append, making this now a unique mesh. Apply, and it flips inside out, so we need to correct that. And then we can join everything together. Doing it that way basically avoids the issue of if you just join everything together, which you can do, it basically means that half the mesh is inverted and the other half is the correct way around. So you have to then do a bit of fiddling to try and invert the inverted surfaces. So we want everything to be parented to the heart. So select that last. It's handlebars, exhaust, heart, Control J, joins everything together. Ooh, and because, right, so we need to add an edge split modifier because the handlebars and the exhaust have lost their smoothing because the heart didn't have one. So we need to add an edge split modifier. Disable edge angle, and that returns everything. Right, so just duplicate that. And we just want to roughly position it so that we can scale it up. So press the S key. That's about right. Single seater. Yeah, that looks about right. So this is one of the reasons why the dummies are included. It's not just that they provide a proxy for the position of the seating nodes. That's these wireframe cubes. That's your seating nodes. It's because they also are useful for scaling your furniture items so that when you make something, it's the right size relative to the avatar. Because what we're going to do with this next we should have time for this, is to create a custom pose. So move that out of the way. I'm just going to hide it. Get rid of the default cube. So we want the furniture node, because this is just a simple furniture item. Maybe move that up a little bit so that it's not actually touching the ground. Right, so for a furniture item, edit mode, select everything. So everything is selected. Object data properties, we need to create a vertex group. So that's this section. We need to create a vertex group, so click the plus button. And this needs to be called root. So double click, uppercase R, double O-T, assign, select, deselect, and just use the select and deselect buttons to double check. Now if you are using nodes for your furniture item as opposed to an armature and skeletons, the next step is to select the object, the mesh, shift click the root node and use Control P. And that gives us a parent menu, or object, parent, object, and then keep transform. So Control P is just a shortcut to get to the same pop-up. And what that does is it now means that the root node controls the mesh. Hang on, just checking something. Checking. Right, so that's okay. Right, so that's literally as easy as furniture items can be. You are literally just linking a mesh to a node, and that is it. The bit that's important is to make sure that your mesh has a vertex group, and that vertex group is called root, because that is the name of the node. And it's that name that creates a link or association in IMVU between the objects. So at the moment this is just a very, very basic furniture item, and that's as simple as they need to be. So it's just a mesh and a node. So for this, save this file, save as. We can export this to check that the furniture item works. So right click, shift right click, export FBX. We want selected objects, selected objects. So we're now in this section on the bottom left. We want selected objects. Geometry, disable, use modifier, render settings. Armature, always make sure that add leaf bones is disabled. Animation, well, you can leave that for now. So selected objects, that's fine. That's fine. Export. So, IMVU. So that's exported an FBX file. The FBX file is a binary. It's a binary file. There are two versions that you can export, or two types. Binary and ASCII. You can use either or, but ASCII tends to cause issues with IMVU, so always stick with the default, which is binary. So IMVU, create. Oh, and this always takes such a long time. There we go. Derived new product. We want rooms and furniture. We want furniture. This will give us a default chair. So that's the default chair. FBX export, import rather, load FBX. And we need to be in furniture. Lots of FBX files. Harterbike Mark 9. And because it's a simple furniture item, it doesn't bring in, you don't get the select skeletal root dialog box, which you can get for other products. But it's brought in the materials, so 0, 1, 2, cube. We can probably rename that, but this needs to be 0. Apply scale 0.01 for Blender, and rename, disable that, so deselect and then import, and this should bring in our Harterbike. Way. So there is our Harterbike. That's quite good actually. And as you can see, it's automatically assembled everything, because everything was included in the file, the FBX file. It's automatically assembled everything. And we can either, we can even include all the vertex colors as well. Excellent. So let's save this just as a reference point. Now, so what can we do now? So what we want to do now then is add a pose. Where's my pen? Right, so done texture, although it's very simple and basic. We've created a furniture item, although again very simple and basic. So what we're going to do now is add a pose to this. So we're going to use the furniture pose files, dummy stuff. So that's all these nodes. They're grouped together by default, And the way to move them generally is just to select the big node at the bottom. That controls the whole group. Just click on that and move the node and group into an approximate position. Where's his butt? Right, so what we've done there is we've just positioned the seating roughly where it needs to appear on the object when it's used in IMVU. We need to make an adjustment to the catcher and pitcher nodes because we want these to be at ground level, so we can select those and we can actually move them as a pair off to one side. And what this does and we are in global, so that's okay, so we can even rotate them as a group and they'll rotate so that we can position them in a slightly better way relative to the furniture item, because what you find often is that people will position their seating, they'll add their seating, but they won't do anything with the catcher and pitcher nodes. So when you shake hands with someone, they're standing, you know, in mid-air. But you can move these two nodes and position them at ground plane so that when the avatars interact with one another and shake hands, they are both standing on the ground. Right, so let's just rename this. So this is in object properties, so we want .mesh. We don't need to name that. Right, so we need to save this, save as. Right, so what we now need to do is bring the mesh and the seat node and the root node into the pose file so that we can create a pose. So the root node gives us our object's precise position relative to the grid, which is 0, 0. The seat node gives us our positioning of the avatar relative to the root node, and as we can see with this, they're not in the same position, so that's okay, that's fine. And what that will do is we'll then, in the pose file, we'll match the seat node with the avatar, which we'll see in a minute. We'll match the seat node with the avatar so that we can then create a custom pose that will fit on the motorbike or the harter bike. So we need the pose file for that. So again, catsbits.com/IMVU, and for this you need the avatar pose file. Either will do, male or female. In this instance, as a furniture item, both will function the same way. So we need the not furniture. We need the pose file. Where's the pose file? Poses, there we go. So this is Blender's pose file. It's a representation of the IMVU avatar. And the bones are sticking out all over the place because they have to match the original file that was created in 3D Studio Max. And the difference is due to the global orientation, the difference between Max and Blender. In 3D Studio Max, well, just select that bone. In 3D Studio Max, I think it's the y-axis, which is the green arrow, the green widget arrow in Blender, that points up, and the blue arrow in Blender points up, but that in Max points forward. And the problem with that is that if you actually set up a skeleton to match that in Blender, it doesn't work. It produces a disaster, actually. So the bones are all set up the way that they should be set up to create a functional pose for IMVU. So don't worry about their pointing out all over the place. All you need to focus on is just making a pose. And the way that we do that, so I'm going to save this file first. Save as, don't want to overwrite. I'm going to append the files, well, some of the bits of the file that we were just working on. So we need to go into furniture. We need to find the Harter bike. So there's the Harter bike. So when you are appending in Blender, the Blender files act as an equivalent would be a zip file or a RAR file, so they're an archive. So if you click the file, you'll go into the contents of the file itself, and we want object, and it lists all the objects that were in our file that we were working on, and we want did we save over the file? Oh, we didn't save the update, did we? Okay, so cancel that. Open up the... Just double check that. Yeah, harterbike.mesh. Oh, that should have worked. Harterbike pose. Append furniture. Oh, wrong file. So we want number 10. That's why. Harterbike mesh. Root. And seat. Where's the seats gone? Seat 01. I can't remember which one it is, but just select both of them for the sake of... So we've got the mesh, the root node, and the seat node. Append. And so that's brought those in as a selection. So what we now need to do is align the seat node with female 03 master root. So that origin point annotation. So this point in the center here, where the widget is, and this origin point, that needs to match up with that to do the pose. So select, oops, we need to move this slot as a group so that we keep the positioning that we created in the furniture file. So that's match that up. And now all we do is create our pose. So let's just save this. Save as. Drop that in furniture. Right, so pose. The first thing we need to do is lower the position . Yes, lower the position of the avatar. So we're selecting individual bones and using the widget tools. So we've got translate, rotate. We don't need scale, so it's just translate and rotate. And all we're going to do is select individual bones and rotate them. Keep it in mind that the bones as they appear, so this is the thigh bone, so this really should only twist. It shouldn't be used as a hip bone because there is an actual hip bone. You might have to hunt around for these because of their position. Are we in local? We're in local, yes. So all we're doing is selecting individual bones and just moving them, rotating. So just block out your pose first. So you just want the broader positions of the bones. Then you can start fiddling with them. Oh, that's convenient. The hand's almost where the handlebars are. And for the shoulders in particular, make sure that when you are rotating or moving the shoulder, you are actually using the shoulder bone, which is this tiny little bone, not this larger bone, which is actually the bicep. The bicep twists for the skeleton. It doesn't, it's not a ball joint. That's what the shoulder should be doing. The shoulder is the ball joint. That's the one that moves all over the place, whereas the bicep just twists. And if you use the bicep to do your shoulder joint manipulations, it'll collapse the mesh of the shoulders. So watch out for that. Whoops. So we can see already, just with moving a couple of bones, we've got a decent pose. So all we need to do now is just do a bit more work on it. So just select the individual bones. And if you use the pose starter file, shouldn't need to do anything else other than just move the bones, because the position should automatically be placed into the timeline, which is this thing at the bottom with all these little diamonds. If it doesn't do that, once you've moved a bone, press the I key, I for insert, and it'll insert automatically, or you'll get a pop-up menu that'll give you a couple of options, and you want location, rotation, or lock rot. Whoops. And some of the bones are quite tricky to spot because they're hidden inside other much larger. So these are the neck bones, which are tiny. And it's just a question of starting out with large movements or large changes and then making smaller ones as you get closer to whatever it is that you want the post to look like. So all we're doing at the moment is, whoops, making the avatar look like it's gripping the handlebars. And if the bone moves too, it's sensitive. They are sensitive. So if it moves too quickly, you can hold the shift key down and that will slow down the motion. There is a basic pose. We can actually do something with the hands and the fingers. So let's just save this, save as. So we want to twist the wrist a little bit, or the hands. Is that the hand bone? Yeah, that's the hand bone. And it can be a little tricky to see what's going on because of all the bones. It's in what's called X-ray mode. Which means all the bones show through the mesh. So that's okay. Whoops. So there is a basic pose. So save this, save. Now to export. Oh, hang on, before we need to do something to this. To export a compatible file, pose file for Blender, from Blender for IMVU, we need to do something to the pose file. So select everything. Copy what's selected. And then paste to another frame. So that creates a duration or a sequence duration. Then in another frame we need to reset everything. So that's Alt G and Alt R. And this is important because of the way that the exporter works. It needs to see that something is going on within the file, otherwise it won't export. It won't understand what the export is, the data that's in the FBX file, and the pose won't work. So save that, save as 5. Then we can export this. So exit pose mode, object mode, select the armature, make sure that there's an action. Yes, there is. Export FBX, selected, deselect, use modifiers, armatures, deselect, add leaf bones. For animation, deselect NLA strips and force start and end keying. We're in furniture, blah blah blah, that's okay. So an export. So that should produce another FBX file. So save that. Right, so go back to furniture item. Number 10. So we now need to set this up as a furniture item with seating. So for that, all we need to do is select the nodes, the seat nodes, select all of those first, and then the root node last, and then Control P to parent them, or again object parent object. So now the root bone, or the root node, controls everything, and that includes seat nodes. So save this. And export. So select everything, then right click, shift right click the avatar just to deselect the avatar, right click the root node, and then export as FBX. Whoops. That's number 11, so once selected, deselect, use modifiers, armature, leaf bounds. We don't have any animation with this, with the actual furniture items, so those can be left as is. That's okay. Export. So that's exported. So now we can assemble it all. So this is the original just simple furniture item. So this is our object without any seating. Added as a furniture item. So drive new product, rooms and furniture, gives us a standard chair, go. So there's a standard chair. We need to now FBX import, load FBX. So we need to find number 11. There it is, number 11. So we've now renamed that. So it's brought in the name, so that's good. So mesh 0, again 0.01. Deselect, rename, double check everything's okay, and then import. Texture overwrite, that's fine. Import changes and apply. And now we've got a seat node on the item. Awesome. So just quickly go over the vertex painting, vertex colors, vertex colors. Right, so let's save this so we have a version to go back to. Twitch. This is 2. Then FBX, oh hang on, assets. Right, so everything's okay there. Right, that's fine. So FBX import. FBX, and for this we need the pose file. So pose 5, whoops. Oh, and it's not brought in the, why has it done that? Oh, there we go. And we want the one with 86 bones. So it gives us a couple of options. So when you're exporting poses, if you export the entire contents of the Blender file, the options that are shown in this dialog, because there's an actual armature, a complex armature associated with the avatar, when you import your file, you'll get different options appearing here. And as we saw just then, because there are no meshes selected and all we were actually exporting was the action that's associated with the armature, the dialog doesn't have any data to show you. So we have to unhide the things that the importer thinks are irrelevant and make the appropriate selections. So we want root node with 86 bones. it'll show no meshes, but this should configure FBX. It should bring in our no meshes, but it's brought in our pose. And what we can then do is import. So there's no meshes and no materials. All we've done is imported the pose that's associated with the armature. So import success, and then apply changes. So this doesn't do anything. This doesn't do anything automatically, but because we've imported a second FBX file with an additional skeleton associated with it, it's removed the skeleton that was associated with the furniture item. So we need to go back into config and reselect that and apply it. So now our node is back. So to associate the pose with the furniture item, actions, add. Now is this avatar or room? Can't remember off the top of my head. May have to double check this. Tralala. Hang on a second whilst I check. And yes, one of the reasons for writing the tutorials is so that I remember what the process is. So that is what I'm doing right now, is double checking the right, so what have we got? Right, so once the pose data has been imported, it's available for use. To add it to the derived mood, oh, we're talking about moods here, not furniture items. Because what we want is to associate the pose with the furniture item, or the seat node of the furniture item. And there is a special way of doing that I can't remember off the top of my head. But there is that's an avatar pose. We don't want an avatar pose. What we want is a oh, we forgot to do something. So we've got a pose, but we have to do something to the seat node. Forgot about that. So the seat node, which is this node, this has to be unique. If we leave it with the default name, which is seat01.sitting, IMVU will always use the default sitting pose. It doesn't matter what you do, if the node is called .sitting or .standing, it will always use the default. So we have to rename that and make it unique relative to the product that we're making. So in this instance, we can call it Harterbike. And the first letter of the word is always uppercase. So save that. So we have to export this again. So select everything and then right click the avatar twice just to get rid of it, and then right click the root node, export FBX. Let's just call this 12. Selected objects. Yeah. So we have to import the FBX again. Mark 12. So it's got our materials, mesh. That's okay. Apply changes. So we've got our seat pose, but it's defaulted to the standing pose. So we do have a pose on the item, but because it's using a unique name now, it defaults the avatar to the standing pose. So in actions, we now need to go to stance.heartobike. Type is avatar. Ensembles 0. After playing, pick same. And then we should have, in the ensembles section, we should have our, and there it is, that's the animation or the pose that we created. And then we want replace for composition. And then let's just test this. Oh, is it going to do that thing again? So loop start to loop end 8. What we may need to do, because IMVU does this sometimes, so Twitch I have to save the file, close all the create tabs, reopen them, and then reopen the project, and hopefully this fixes the issue, because it does this sometimes. It's not doing it. Stance.heartobike, that's right. Let's do number of loops 0. Let's double check all of that. Ceto 1 Harterbike, that's right. That's okay. So it's brought the pose data in because it showed us the pose info, the number of frames. So let me just open another instance of Blender. It showed us the number of frames that we created. 19. So that's the distance from frame 1 to frame 20. So the active pose is from frame 1 to frame 10. So let's try exporting in pose mode. Export FBX. Just call this 6. Selected objects. Disable NLA strips, force, start and keying. Export back into IMVU, so we have to import this again. Pose 6. Again, it's not doing the thingamajiggery. So 86 bones. Configure. Yeah, that's fine. So it's seeing the pose data. 0.01. Disable, rename, import. Okay. So we have to reset the furniture item. Oh, that's why. There. Simple typo. There you go. See, it even happens to some of the more expert users. And there is our Harter bike with a custom pose. Not sure what noise that makes. So let's save that. Save as. Twitch. Heart bike 4. So yes, that happens even to some of the more senior IMVU creators. Typos. So you can export everything the way that it should be exported, and just a simple typo and your item's not working, which is one of the hazards of working on your own. You know, if you don't have any communication with other creators, it's one of the things that you'll miss. Vertex, that's okay, that's okay. So there is our Harter bike, our Valentines. Our little Valentines project. Assets, double check so we can get rid of that. That's the skeleton that's brought in with the pose. So that's unused, so we can remove that. So select it, just left click and then remove. Whoops. And that removes it from the file. So yeah, there is our Harter bike. We could probably improve the pose a little bit because she looks a little startled, which I guess you would be riding something like this. But we can also position the fingers a little better around the handlebars. But as you can see, it is pretty straightforward, but the poses in particular are quite fiddly because you have to move individual bones. But beyond that, it's relatively straightforward. So we'll call it quits there because we are coming up on 2 hours. I'm trying to keep these under 2 hours so that they can be highlighted and kept. But for next stream, what we might do is add a simple little animation to the item so that it just bobs up and down as if it's moving. And we can use a special furniture item that was created for meshes in particular, because one of the problems with having this backdrop being white and there being no other objects in the scene, you can't tell sometimes whether something's moving or not, because we've only got the pose spots. So if you do an animation in a white box, you can't tell whether anything's moving. So if you have put something in your scene that's static, that stays in the same place all the time, you'll have that as a reference point for your animation. So there we have. So we'll call it quits there. 2 hours. Thanks for the lurkers lurking and watching. And save that. Save. And we shall see you on the next stream where we will go. We will add animation to a furniture item. Make it super simple, nothing complicated. It's actually quite straightforward to do. Right, so until then, cheerio. Bye everyone.